looks like a Bruce Brown trade is coming, and it is coming soon, as reporters came out revealing that league sources expect Bruce Brown to be traded in the coming weeks. So we're going to break down this report, what it means for the Toronto Raptors, and who we could potentially get back in a potential Bruce Brown deal. So before we dive into that, folks, again, over 52% of our viewers are not subscribed to the channel. Getting some viewers back, the hype is building up for the NBA draft and the NBA offseason, so make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with all of the latest Toronto Raptors news. But let's dive into a recent report, because Doug Smith of the Toronto Star has been talking to league sources and basically came out with a report revealing that Bruce Brown is likely to get traded. Essentially, the Raptors have until June 29th, 2 days after the NBA draft, to exercise an option on the $23 million he's owed for next season for Bruce Brown, a valuable expiring contract to put onto the market. The sense from a handful of league sources, so not Doug Smith saying this, but the league sources across the NBA, that it is expected the Raptors are likely to pick up the option and then turn around and trade Bruce Brown quickly, and rather than wait out till the 2025 trade deadline. So again, we saw some weird Instagram posts a couple weeks ago from Bruce Brown, basically talking about posting some Tim Hortons pictures saying that he's going to change the minds of Raptors fans next season and stuff, which had some Raptors fans expecting that, hey, maybe there's a possibility he's options picked up, or the Raptors decline the option, re-sign him to a different type of contract, but in some shape or form, he'll be back with the Toronto Raptors next season. This does not seem to be the case with this recent report. Basically, Doug Smith goes on to say that chatter around the league's draft combine this week, though, is that Brown is still seen as valuable, a serviceable rotation player on a good team like he was in Denver in 2022 and 2023, and could bring a useful piece in return. Exercising that contract option, and thinking is that they'll do it only with a trade already in place, would also give the Raptors some financial certainty going into talks with Gary Trent Jr. So that's a couple of very interesting points there. So the chatter around the league is, despite the fact Bruce Brown did not have a solid stint with the Toronto Raptors after getting traded this year's trade deadline, he's still valuable across the league. People still view him as that guy that was down there in Denver, that won an NBA championship, that can still be an interesting piece, a key piece on a solid playoff team. So that's a good thing to know, because that was a big worry over the course of the season that, hey, we knew we could potentially get a first-round pick at this year's trade deadline for Bruce Brown. That Knicks pick was reportedly offered to the Toronto Raptors. Again, a late first-rounder, but still something valuable, an interesting draft asset for Bruce Brown ahead of this year's trade deadline. But basically, he didn't play that great to close off the season. No one's going to really argue against that. Bruce Brown last season for the Toronto Raptors, 9 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Not horrible by any means, but 31% from the three-point line. The stats went a little bit better as the season went along, but he is still regarded as a valuable piece across the NBA. Obviously, it's an expensive contract, but it's an expiring next year, so you have all those things to sort of play with and deal with, going into this year's not trade deadline, NBA draft, where you can trade Bruce Brown ahead of his player option sort of extension deadline. But basically, that's where the Raptors are at, so that's a positive. And then also Gary Trent Jr. So if you deal away Bruce Brown, then you have more flexibility to bring back Gary Trent Jr., who is a guy that I've seen a lot of Toronto Raptors fans split on, because certainly an elite shooter, a guy that can knock down the three-point shot at a great rate, still a younger dude, but has kind of regressed in his most recent season with the Toronto Raptors. Didn't take that leap a lot of people were hoping for. I mean, when we traded for him, there's a large wave, a contingent of Raptors fans. I jump on it some nights that were saying, oh, Gary Trent Jr. is the next Bradley Beal, but a two-way guy, had that sort of elite potential, but never really came into his own in terms of that. And definitely last season, even though he became a more efficient stationary jump shooter and, shooting off the dribble and things like that, didn't create his own shot as much as he did in previous years, wasn't scoring a whole ton, and his minutes regressed a little bit, didn't get as many touches as he had in the offense with Nick Nurse. So basically, Gary Trent Jr. probably lost himself a decent chunk of change going into this offseason. Now, the Raptors might be able to bring him back, I want to say at a bargain, but they'll have the flexibility to potentially bring him back and not let that asset walk. But depending on the contract, that could become a liability rather than an asset, depending on how much you're paying him, depending on the length of the contract, all these factors that come into play. But having more shooting around RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes definitely doesn't hurt. So having Gary Trent Jr. potentially come back, I think is more intriguing to Raptors fans than a Bruce Brown. But the report goes on to say the overwhelming feeling is that the Toronto Raptors won't start the season with both Brown and Trent on the roster, and that Trent's relative youth, obviously 25 years old, and shooting ability make him more attractive alternative, as I just sort of discussed. So basically, you trade away Bruce Brown, it's more likely we end up bringing back Gary Trent Jr., but that's his whole own situation that we have to figure out in terms of giving him the role that he wants and giving him the opportunities to be that stretch sort of wing that can blossom and develop into his own. So Gary Trent Jr. is a guy that I think people are split on, but I think most Raptors fans, just given the style of play that Bruce Brown plays, he just doesn't complement RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes that well. It's just the reality of it. He's a solid cutter, solid defender when he's healthy, but just can't space the floor at that elite level, at that wing position that Raptors fans would really need for a guy to potentially, be worth picking up a $20 million option for. But obviously that's an expiring. You wouldn't be paying that much money long term, or else that would be an extreme liability on your books going forward into the future. And then also the flexibility part of it, because the Raptors want flexibility. They want to be able to make some signings. Heck, going to free agency, we just saw a little rumors about Patrick Williams being a guy to throw money at. I'd much rather pay Patrick Williams, $20 million per year than a Bruce Brown. That's just the reality of it, even though Williams has dealt with some injuries. So what could we potentially get for a Bruce Brown sort of package? And hopefully the way people are talking about this year's NBA draft, we'd be able to get some draft capital, get some younger pieces, whether it's this pick. I feel like a draft pick in this year's NBA draft is more realistic. I made a video recently about how the Memphis Grizzlies are trying to trade away their their number 9 selection for a win now guy. Bruce Brown is certainly a win now guy, but again, it just is a bad look. No matter how much you value those picks at the top of this year's NBA draft, it's just a bad look for your franchise to trade for a dude that's coming off a slow season, even if he won a championship 2 years prior. I just don't think their GM would do it without us accepting and taking on a bad contract, which might not be a bad thing for the Toronto Raptors, who are rebuilding, developing, and things like that. Luke Kennard could be an interesting piece coming back to the squad, but depending on how this Game 7 goes with the Denver Nuggets, maybe they'd be interested in giving us one of their younger guys a piece to bring back Bruce Brown on that sort of option. Again, money would be a tough thing to sort of work out there at that point, but I'd look at other contenders. I'd look at other top teams in the NBA and look at them and project. And the Philadelphia 76ers were also a squad that was interested in Bruce Brown at the trade deadline. They're getting off of Tobias Harris, so if they strike out on Jimmy Butler and Paul George this offseason, wouldn't be shocked if they're interested in sort of acquiring Bruce Brown at some point. But there's a lot of options now for Bruce Brown, what you can do with this contract, but it's safe to say it's likely he's going to get traded. This was our sentiments going into the offseason, but a couple weeks ago, we got a little bit of a swerve there with, some weird Instagram posts, some weird tweets, social media posts from Bruce Brown. Maybe he does come back. We'll end up seeing. But you guys are the best way to get started. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. It means the world to me. But I'm signing out. Cheers.